Coming up on Creating North of 55.
That's why I started the podcast, is because if one person, hopefully more, but even if one person hears a story and relates and they get help or it saves their life, mission accomplished.
No doubt. Yeah, and that is the power of story, right? And telling those stories is not easy. Welcome back to Creating North of 55. I'm your host, Mariah Braun, and today we've got a special guest. We've got a podcaster, a local spoon carver, and a fellow story hiver, Gabe Moose. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm so excited to talk with you today, and it's so exciting because we both recently started a podcast.
Yeah,
That's big. We're podcasters now.
Yeah, it's brand new. It's exciting, though.
What is the name of your podcast? And what inspired that exactly?
So the podcast is called Hard Hats and Hard Roads, and it basically speaks for itself. It's hard hats, it's what everyone basically, regardless if you're a first responder or if you're
blue collar kind of thing.
Yeah. And then hard roads, it could be metaphorical or it could be literal.
Yeah, totally. Up here, definitely.
Yeah.
Fix our
100%.
roads, please.
Yeah. Good old leasers.
I mean, there's a lot of trucks that go through this area, so the roads take a hit. But yes, you're kind of saying people have gone through these hard roads, and that's what you kind of want to capture. It's pretty rare that we get to talk about it like this early on. Like, how many episodes deep are you in right now?
So we've filmed 4 episodes so far, so out of 8, so we're getting there. We're about halfway there.
Wow, yeah. So you're funded by Telus STORYHIVE, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you've committed to 8 episodes.
Yes.
What a big feat, hey?
Yeah, it's
but
big.
It's awesome because STORYHIVE gets you kind of in the programming. They teach you a bunch, but honestly, I kind of just want to know where you started, because you don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to start a podcast. That takes guts. It's brave.
Yeah, it was kind of random. I didn't start out as a creator. I started out in the oil and gas industry, actually, in construction since I was 17 years old.
Okay.
And I developed a bad spinal disease and many other ailments on my spine, so I was left unemployed and bored, and so I'm like, what do I do with my hands?
Yeah.
So I did some Googling and found out, I've always worked with lumber and wood and stuff like that, so I love wood, and I started carving, and one day a lady got a hold of me and asked if I could carve her a big 18-inch spoon, and I went for it, and now it's just taken off. I've sold to a master chef in the UK, and it's just starting to take off, and it's been wonderful. And then from there, I received a wonderful idea to apply to Telus STORYHIVE.
I love to hear that you kind of had this creative bone in you a little bit, early with handcrafted stuff. And then, you realize through your journey that you have a lot of stories to tell. And I know that you have a community of men around you, and that kind of inspired the idea. Is that kind of how it got started, like the theme of your podcast?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I go to this place called the Grand Prairie Men's Shed, and it's awesome. I've seen grumpy old dudes come in there, and now they've been going there for a while, and their whole world's changed. Their attitude, their everything. This guy is making muffins for everybody all the time. He didn't do that. That's not a thing he did before. So seeing everyone's change, I wanted to amplify that on a bigger level and tell local stories based on male-dominated industries. So,
can you give us a little insight, or is it totally secret that you can't give away what guests you might have on or anything like that?
I could
you can give us a little bit of sneak peek.
Taste.
Okay, I love it.
So I have a few guests that I think are going to be really powerful. For one, there's a guy who's local, and he's only told his story to his wife and his mental health counselor. He's a Harley Davidson mechanic, heavy duty equipment operator, and he's just a guy from GP who's big tattooed guy, and he thought that if he came on the podcast and maybe shed a tear and told his story, that it might save a life. It might, and I'm in. That's why I started the podcast, is because if one person, hopefully more, but if one person hears a story and relates and they get help or it saves their life, mission accomplished.
No doubt. Yeah. And that is the power of story, right? And telling those stories is not easy, right? Like you think, okay, podcast. So how am I going to start it? How am I going to introduce this? Is there stuff that you're learning about the creative process through StoryHive's program, through actually doing the podcast? What has that journey looked like so far?
It's been awesome. It's a very entry level program, so anyone can apply. It sounds intimidating, but it's really awesome. They are there for you through every process, and with you being a story hiver, it's really helped a lot.
Oh,
Like
wow.
the ins and outs, and it kind of really helped my vibe for sure. Like being in this atmosphere is just one thing, but like being in the atmosphere with you guys is a whole nother thing.
Yeah. And yeah, by the way, for people that don't know, Gabe shoots his podcast right here at M3M Studios. And so we've created kind of like a set for you, a standard set. Bring in the carpet, we bring in, the mics, and you get to focus on creating, which I hope is helpful to you. And yeah, there is so much to learn, like even from like how to ask the right questions or like the flow of an interview, which, even me being an experienced seasoned person with interview styles, with documentary, podcasting is a different format. And it's challenging to find that groove. Like, I've only filmed a couple so far. So like, it's really fresh. Like you have more episodes under your belt than I do. And it's like, wow, we're doing the thing, we're creating the themes, and like we're really in that same spot. And the beauty part is, we're not just setting up and just creating this podcast just because we're sharing that human experience. And that's what the beautiful part about creating really, for me anyways, I don't know about you, maybe I'm just speaking on your behalf a little bit here, but it's that human experience. And it's what binds us together. And in a digital world, it's kind of cool to like bring that in a digital form.
Yes, it's accessible to everyone nowadays, so why not spread the word?
Yeah. And I think, there's maybe like the happy-go-lucky podcast. Maybe they're talking about like some kind of fandom or whatever the case may be. But, and not to say like my podcast is like hard-hitting. Like I would say yours is kind of hard-hitting. And some of the content that I've done in the past is a lot of sensitive subject matter. And you're handling that really, really well. That takes skills and practice, and it's not easy. Like there's a certain way you have to kind of manage that sensitive subject matter. And so, do you have anything to kind of say in terms of that journey? Because it is different. Like it's a layer on top of a layer. Like you've got all the technical stuff, getting the interviewees, making sure they show up to the interview. That's tough too. And then you've got, handling sensitive subject matter in a nice, respectful way for those interviewees. Do you have anything to kind of share about that?
Yeah, I think me having dealt with many physical and mental traumas in my past, and getting through that by getting pretty much hardcore trauma therapy has been a lifesaver. It's how I can control my emotions and listen to other people's story without letting it affect me so hard by the end of the day. So I just be mindful of how I'm feeling, and if I'm feeling, then I jog. And which is what I'm trying to show other people. So I need to do it myself.
Right? And like, so you're learning about yourself through this process. And I think people who haven't yet dealt with subject matter like this, it gets really emotionally taxing. Like there's this whole level that people do not even see. Like you have to move through these stories and reflect on yourself and learn stuff about yourself. And it's beautiful, but it can make it hard. Have you experienced anything like that?
I'm learning more about my family and my history, as I wasn't raised in a traditional Native setting. I was raised Catholic, so I'm learning all about myself now.
It's life-changing, right? Like if I didn't have this experience, I wouldn't have learned that XYZ thing about myself.
That's right.
And that's huge for sure. Good for you. That's a part of the journey not a lot of people know about. So StoryHive, like what an awesome program, right? Like they say, hey, we want these submissions for video podcasting, which by the way, I think it's the first edition of the video podcast series that they kind of put out, and they fund creators, emerging creators. So these people have either a little bit of experience or none at all, like Gabe. So what an awesome program. What was the process like for that? Like even just putting the application together, and then maybe give us some insight into some of the things that they provide you in terms of support and training.
Yeah, so the application was pretty simple, but they asked for a lot of details, which is fair. Like they want to know what your ideas are, what you want to do, and then if and when you get accepted, you do 3 sessions, and it's like podcast school. It's actually pretty awesome. It's they teach you all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, like, you know, what formats you have to deliver in, and maybe giving you some software ideas. And it's nice because I think it's all over Zoom these days. Like before, when I first started, they'd like ship you out to like Calgary or Edmonton or something. Yeah, they would.
That would be
Yeah, I know,
cool.
right? They used to, but it kind of makes sense, right?
It
Like
does, yeah.
budgeting, like why not put that money towards like helping the creators instead of like flights and stuff, which, you know, most people, you know, granted, like because we're in the north, there's probably only a few people that get flown in, right? Like everyone else kind of drives, or like they're already in Edmonton and Calgary, because that is one of the areas that they kind of support people in, right? So yeah, I know myself as like a indie documentarian, I guess. When I first did my shorts, like it was really cool to network with those people and connect, and just learn about other people's projects and all the interesting stories that are out there. That basically, if it wasn't funded by Telus STORYHIVE, like maybe wouldn't have been possible, right? Because this stuff takes money. Like it's time, it's energy, it's all those kind of things, right? And so, like literally, look at Gabe. He had 0 experience. So if you are a creative out there, or maybe not even a creative yet, like definitely check out StoryHive and what they have to offer, because you never know when there's another opening for another video podcast series or what. Yeah. And so that brings me back to kind of like, you know, we're just starting these podcasts. So like, how are you settling in? Because like, it's hard. Like even right now, I'm just like, oh my gosh, am I doing a good job? I'm kind of going all over the place. You know, there's just so many things that go through your mind on top of speaking into the mic and making sure you sound correct, right? Like, let's be real about it. It's really hard.
With my ADHD, I'm like, what do I do with my hands? Like,
There's so many things to think about, right?
But it, like, from doing the 4th episode yesterday, I feel a lot more comfortable in the host role. I might not look it, but I'm definitely feeling it, and I think I'm gonna I'm gonna feel the role a little more once I mellow into it. But it is nerve-wracking, but it's worth it when you get the stories out.
Yeah, and that first episode, right, like is always going to be like the roughest. Like you have no format, no structure to anything. I mean, unless you kind of planned it out, which even when you do plan things out, things can it just happens the way it happens, right?
Yeah.
Like even our talk today, like we have some kind of structure to work off of, but things move and change as the conversation kind of move along, right? And so settling into that host role and getting used to being like, okay, this is a podcast I'm doing, and thinking of the themes and all that creative stuff that we have to go over. It's interesting, but like it's kind of cool to see like someone like yourself who is just like no experience at all, and someone like me who has production experience and other things like that. But yet we're still at the same point.
Yeah. We're
Like,
just noobs.
it doesn't mean anything.
No.
Whether you have tons of experience or baseline of experience, it's totally possible for you to start your own first podcast, essentially. If you've got a bright idea, you got a theme, you think it matters to an audience out there, go for it, right?
100%. Yeah. I'm learned that firsthand, that's for sure. This is starting to take off. It's starting to react with the community a little bit and before it's even aired, so that's cool.
Yeah, and there's so many other things that go into it, like not only just shooting the podcast itself, it's the branding, it's your synopsis, it's social media, behind the scenes coverage. There's a lot of moving parts, hey? Like,
Yeah.
And was that hard for you in terms of like creating like the artwork or like having a direction there? Like, did you have a pretty clear vision for yourself?
Honestly, I'm pretty shocked, but yeah, I had an idea, but honestly, I just brought my idea to you and we didn't even really need to go into it. You just like vibe off my ideas and it just like bang.
Yeah,
Like that's pretty cool.
it definitely helps to have somebody like that in your corner. And, I help other creatives with their projects too, whether it's like really hands-on, like Gabe's, where I'm like producing the thing, I'm filming it for him, editing the whole thing, putting in that sweat. Like I'm in the trenches with your podcast every like month, really, which I love, by the way. Or I just do some consulting for people. So I'll talk to them on the phone about their creative visions and kind of help them work through that. And I really love that. And that's also part of the StoryHive journey too of mine, is that I have been a StoryHiver myself. I've been funded 2 times. I'm very lucky for that. And then now I mentor people.
Yeah.
So that's a really great way of giving back. Yeah, it is really, really nice to be able to give back to other StoryHivers that are doing projects today. I'm really thankful to StoryHive and the NSI, of course, for putting that program on, that mentee and mentor program that they have there. So yeah. Do they give you any mentorship? I mean, I know the training that we already talked about, but do they give you anything like that?
Yeah, they assign you a project manager and you get this cool app where you can like contact other StoryHivers and your project manager, and it's really hands-on. It's great.
Yeah, you guys can kind of talk amongst each other and share resources, share experiences, and help one another too through the process, because getting that information quicker and sooner is always the better thing, especially when you're up against tight deadlines. I think, you have to kind of submit a couple episodes a month. Is that correct? And
Yeah.
you've got months and months of pre-production, which is great, right? Like you can kind of find who you want to interview and who you want to talk to and have some backups lined up just in case.
Yeah.
I never know. So yeah, that program is so great, and congratulations. I never said that earlier. Congratulations, because not everyone gets selected. There's ideas out there that maybe aren't fleshed out enough, or you just don't get selected. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try again to apply, because to be honest, I've been denied by Telus STORYHIVE. Like I've submitted stuff and we've not got funded. And they've got their own reasons, which is totally okay. But I've been blessed to be funded twice now, right? So that's another different thing, right? Like this podcast is called Creating North of 55. So we're talking about people who create things north of the 55th parallel. And that is you. You're from Sexsmith, right? So like, what would you say is like the difference between like maybe a more urban center that, creators are doing stuff, because you talk to other story hivers in bigger centers. What do you think the difference is between creating stuff, in Northwest Alberta compared to like Edmonton, Calgary, or Vancouver, or wherever?
Right. Yeah, no, I definitely can see there's a different atmosphere and aesthetic towards the bigger city centers. I I don't know, I get a small town, small local business feel when I come here. And it's cool too because not a lot of story hivers have this as a resource. They don't have a podcast studio. They're getting their own equipment and they're filming it on their own. They're figuring out their own specs, which it's a lot, but it's still doable. But if you have a podcast studio near you, preferably M3M, check them out.
Yeah. And that does, like, not to say that you can't without a studio.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
Gabe, you decide to go that route and it's been working out for you, right?
It just lets me focus more on the stories and not the editing and all that stuff. Like I can connect with people a little more.
Yeah. And that's important, to make sure the show is good and it's got lots of value to it. But yeah, like that's why we started this studio. We're the first content studio north of Edmonton. I don't think there's any in Fort McMurray. So I'm very proud to be bringing this to Grand Prairie, giving people the opportunity to rent a space, whether you want us to shoot it or you shoot it yourself or whatever the case may be. I'm very proud to have this multifaceted kind of studio. It's not just a photo studio. It's not just a video studio. It's all encompassing. You can do podcasts, you can do photo shoots. And by the way, like you came in and did some shots too yourself.
Yeah.
In our product content creation creative lab recently. And that was cool, right? Did you kind of learn anything from that experience?
Oh, so much. Like I brought in my spoons that I've carved, and literally it's just lighting. And I took all the from my all the phones, all the pictures from my phone, and they're all like I barely even had to edit them. I learned so much being here, and the content I created was just beautiful.
Right. And all it took was a little lighting and like a little bit of like, okay, how do we frame this to look nice? And
Yeah.
you walked away with a few assets to kind of use for some promotion around maybe Christmas gifts. And if you haven't checked out his content online with his spoons, it's Gabe's Little Whittles, right?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, I'm like making sure I didn't get that backwards. Yeah, definitely check it out. A great gift for Christmas or any occasion, really. It's a very special gift because it's handcrafted, which is hard to find these days, right?
Yeah, and I use a specific oil on them. It's water, scratch, and stain resistant, so it's an heirloom. It'll last you forever. It'll pass it down to whoever you want.
Yeah, yeah. And so like when you're taking those photos, like we just like adjusted the light ever so slightly. We went into this like darker room. We went into the podcast room. We made it really dark in there and like moody, kind of like your podcast style. We did a little bit there. And Gabe was just taking his cell phone. Like literally, that's all it takes is just a little bit of light and having an environment like this where you can create that kind of content, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, you're right. It is different living in Grand Prairie in Northwest Alberta. We've got different lifestyles. We've got different stories here to tell compared to big city folk, as I like to say. And that produces different kind of content, which I think is an advantage for us creators here in the North.
Yeah, it's definitely different work life, home life in comparison to the bigger cities, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And not to say like you shouldn't go to the big cities and experience that.
No.
I've been on crews before in larger cities, and I plan to in the future as I grow my experience in the indie film world. And yeah, like whenever I go out there, I go on any other crew, whether it's in a big city or, across the border in BC, I always learn something new about the creative craft of filmmaking, right? And so, go and explore that. If you want to be on a set and you have some skills, like go lend them to another crew and kind of observe, like take that as a learning experience, right? Yeah. And so kind of wrapping up here today, is there any advice that you have for any new creatives or emerging creatives in terms of maybe starting their own podcast or just going into content creation as a whole? What would you say to somebody?
For me, it seemed overwhelming, but I just got in my head. But I think anyone can do it, in my opinion. If you have a genuine idea and a goal, and it can, like, if you have faith in it, it'll happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got to try stuff, right? You just got to try it.
Yeah.
Like, the one shoot we had somebody video conference in, and I'm like, oh my goodness, how am I going to make this happen for Gabe? Got to think about all these technical things. But I just had to try it, and it went fine.
It was good.
It was great.
That's my whole vibe with this whole podcasting. I'm like, I'm just going to go with the flow and things will happen. If I stress about it, like, I feel like things will go crazy. So I'm like, let's go with the flow. And things have just been happening.
Yeah, it happens. And you know that you have people in your corner too, right?
That's what
You've got a lot of support out there, and you're kind of gearing up for season 2 even. Like, you're kind of getting that hyped about this idea, right? Yeah. Like, it's not just a one and done, one season and that's it. That's all you guys get. It's actually a big thing that you're trying to continue on in the future. So season 2, you're kind of looking for sponsors. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. I'm looking for sponsors. If anyone's curious about that, feel free to get a hold of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't wait to see what season 2 brings for you, and even season 1. Like, I mean, we've filmed 4 so far, and I'm excited for those to be released. When does that get released?
It gets released in spring 2025.
Okay, and then set to kind of start season 2 sometime like after that, maybe. Hey? Yeah, cool. That's awesome. Well, congratulations, and thank you so much for being on the show, Gabe. Really appreciate you sharing this experience about starting a podcast and kind of sharing that experience with us today.
Oh, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Mariah.
Awesome. Well, that's all we have today for Creating North of 55. Follow us on the socials, and we'll see you next time.